Hello, and welcome on in to our third episode of Classic Pro Wrestling with the WFIA. I am Chris DiCarlo, a WFIA board member. To my right, in the corner to my right, is Mr. Mike the Class DiGregorio from Rhode Island. How are you, sir?
Good.
To my left corner is our producer and friend, the one and only player, Mr. Benny Scala.
And the player has no class. Don't forget that.
And down to the corner of our left is Mr. 605, Mr. Belt History himself, Reggie Harp. Welcome.
Yep. Thanks for the invite, guys. Thank you for the invite.
And last but always not least, right, our buddy from Manitoba, Canada, historian of not just Canada, but all the territories in pro wrestling, Mr. Wes Maidment.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on, Chris and guys. Nice to meet you all, and looking forward to a big WFIA show.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah. So we want to start it off. We'll have Reggie talk a little bit about, he was at GrappleCon too, and some of the wrestlers that you met. And how was it, Reggie?
Hey, man, it was a great convention. It's one of those conventions that it's not too big, but it's not too small. It's actually only a one-day event, right? But everybody comes into town early and just hangs out. It's more, like I said, when we say fan fest, we just think about the fans interact with the wrestlers, but a lot of times it's the fans interact with each other, right? So, everybody likes to hang out that Thursday night, Friday night. And Saturday was the actual convention where, I don't know if you remember the card, but on the super ticket, they had Arn Anderson, Nikita Koloff, they had Ming, they had a old school wrestler named Larry Hamilton from the old territory days.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and they had a few vendor guests also. They had people like Glacier, Ray Lloyd. And,
okay.
Wow. And I don't know, man. If y'all know, they actually premiered or showed a movie that him and Ming had made about, last 4 or 5 years with COVID. It kind of put things on hold, but they actually made a movie and it's out, I think, streaming on Amazon. It's almost like a group of like 7 wrestlers, and they kind of like trying to get back on the road. It had
Wow.
What was the wrestler he used to team with in WCW, Glacier, and Ernest Miller. Ernest Miller was in it.
I'm the greatest. Yeah.
And Larry Zbyszko. But they premiered the movie. That was on Saturday morning. And like I said, the Fan Fest was from like 12 to 3. And like I said, if you're really into interacting with the wrestlers themselves, it was small and quaint. And you actually had a lot of one-on-one time with the wrestlers, which a lot of times, I don't know if you guys go to conventions. A lot of times you don't get there. A lot of times you just get in line. You spend your $60 or $80 or things are outrageous now. You snap your picture and they pat you on the back, rub your head, and, you go your fairy way. But this one, you actually get a little bit of time with the wrestlers. And, for a lot of fans, that's what they really want. That's what it's all about, their interaction. Because, think about these are the guys that we actually grew up watching. These are the guys that, you didn't really believe in Batman or Superman, but you believed in wrestling that came on Saturday. You believed in the Four Horsemen. You know what I'm saying?
It was real to us.
And as the prime fan, Dave really said it's still real to him. So you know what I'm saying? So right. Exactly. And that's what made it real good. Just the fan interaction.
I saw you. You took a picture, or you actually Abdullah the Butcher, Reggie.
What's that?
Abdullah the Butcher, he was there.
Yeah, Abdullah the Butcher, he was there. Like I said, he was his own vendor guest, and I've seen Abdullah around, y'all. It's to the point now, like I said, I'm just collecting small things. I'm not a big collector when it comes to autographs. I get them on my belts, but I have a few things that I bought, and I had a picture that Jimmy Valiant had signed. It was like one of them bloody Abdullah pictures with Abdullah and Jimmy, and I was like, hey, Abdullah's here. And guys, and not be throwing out prices, but Abdullah, the cost of things now is crazy. But Abdullah was only charging $20 for an autograph, y'all, and that's in this day and age, that's pretty good, because it like I said, we were talking about price. Everything's getting outrageous now. It's really crazy.
I'm not big on autographs, but I'd love a picture.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah, I want to go after Mike too because
Absolutely.
he might have the same question.
So as far as conventions, how many have you attended total? Do you know? Do you have a roundabout idea?
Well, I'll put it like this. Sometimes, actually, conventions, I might go to 2 to 3 or 4 big conventions a year, and maybe what I call meet and greets, when they do spot shows at like a gymnasium, I might do 2 or 3 or 4 of those a year. But the big conventions is about maybe at 3 or 4 years, as y'all were talking. I've never did the CAC, but I did Waterloo a couple years ago. I'm about to do WrestleCon in Vegas in about 2 weeks. It's a big one that comes up in Charlotte every year. It's called a Gathering. That's at the end of late July, early August. And then I go to WrestleCade. That's the big one they have in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I do that every year. And Barry Rose event that I just went to, they're going to have that again in October. So, like I said, and guys, with me, honestly, sometimes it's not about the wrestlers who's going to be there. Like I said, it becomes a family. You know, like the guys that you see and the guys that you hang out with at those conventions. And you know, like I said, I don't care what color you are, what religion you are, what creed you are. When everybody gets together, it's we all got one common interest. We old school professional wrestlers. Like some of them guys still watch the product. I really don't. But like I said, everybody has that interest. And like I said, and everybody, it treats it as a family because we feel like we are a family, you know?
Right. So if I see you guys, we're going to get together because we only see each other this way. But at a convention, we're going to hang out.
And that's what it's all about. That's why I say it's the wrestling fan fest by day and night. It's the fan fest with the fans at night because everybody's just hanging out. And that's when you get to know people. You start knowing about the family and like this general conversation you guys were having earlier. And then all of a sudden, like I said, it goes beyond wrestling. It goes on to personal things, which is really good.
Right. You were going to say something, Benny?
Yeah, well, I'd like to get both of our esteemed guests' opinions on this. I saw something online because you're talking about the GrappleCon and how much it costs to get in, but I saw something for WrestleMania. If you want to do like a meet and greet with a Braun Breaker, it's $499. And one of the appeals to me of wrestling, it was always like a blue collar kind of sport where you could always afford it. And, you could even bring your family to the matches, but who can afford something like that?
My boss is an old school wrestling fan, and he goes to Vegas quite a bit. So he gets comped for hotel room and everything and flight. He's going to WrestleMania, and he said it was a ticket was well over $1,000. And he said he signed up for a bunch of other things that obviously I don't know how much they are, but they're add-ons also. And I don't know. I go to independent shows here and I pay my $20 to get in, and I watch what I watch, and most of the time, like you said, Reggie, it's just talking to the fans and talking to your people, that your new friends, right? You guys you just met and you've got something in common. But that, Benny, that's extravagant to me. Like $499, and what are you going to get? No, at CAC in the summer, I didn't have an extra $60 to get a Sting autograph, but Sting donated all the money he made back to the CAC. So that's a cool thing. But on the same note, holy smokes, $499 for, and who did you say it was, Benny? Like, I don't know.
For Braun Breaker, and there was a couple other ones, but and now George is here, and I'm sure George can chime in. When I went to my first show at the Island Gardens in West Hempstead, New York in 1968, when Bruno Sammartino, the champion of the world, was in the ring, you could hand him up something and he would sign it for you. And he didn't have a credit card imprinter there. Like he signed for, they were his fans. He was grateful to do it for nothing.
Yeah. Hello, George.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
I'm sorry I'm late.
It's no problem. We're glad to have you. I got to do my introduction for him, right, guys? Historian of not just the AWA, but all the territories, our good friend, Mr. George Schire from Minnesota.
And a really good guy.
A great guy.
I'll send you all a quarter.
Thank you.
A great guy. Well, just in time, George. Let's start clip number 1. Benny, if you will, the U.S. title.
U.S. title. Here we
Ladies and
go.
gentlemen, this will be the main event of the evening. One fall with a curfew time limit. It will be for the North American Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. Introducing, first of all, from Wilmington, Delaware, weighing in tonight at 285 pounds, Dick, the Bulldog Brower, the North American champion.
Georgia, the North American Heavyweight Champion, Ox Baker. One fall with a 15-minute time limit.
Once again, wrestling fans, you're having an opportunity to see the North American Wrestling Champion, sanctioned by the International Wrestling Association, Ox Baker, weighing in at 305 pounds. His opponent, a young man who hails from Brooklyn, New York, Ron Martinelli.
Come in. Referee warning Pat. Well, let's get over to Miss Wrestling. She'll give the star to Alexia Smirnoff, the winner over the Masked Scorpion. Here comes Kaiser and Smirnoff. What a vicious... We told you we'd cripple him. Yeah, well, that was rotten. Way up on the top rope. Way up there. Holy
Well, guys, I'll start it off, and I'm going to go right to you, Reggie, Mr. Beltman, 605 himself. The U.S. title, right, as we all saw it there, the classic U.S. title belt that started with, was on the waist of Dick the Bulldog Brower, but there they called it the North American Heavyweight Championship, but we know it as the U.S. Championship, and also the Sheik in Detroit had that belt. Ric Flair, Sergeant Slaughter, Greg Valentine, right? The list goes on. Reggie?
Yeah, well, actually, the Sheik version, which was out Detroit, was not affiliated with the Crockett version. You know, the Sheik's version, actually, you know, we're all familiar with the United States title from the Crockett version, and that version was started with Harley Race, and I believe the year was 1973. Harley Race was the first inaugural Mid-Atlantic United States heavyweight champion.
Right, correct.
Yeah, but the Sheik version, which was in Detroit, and I believe your clip said it was. I seen the Big Time Wrestling, but they said it was fun. It was sponsored by the IWA. They said IWA.
The first two were IWA. The third there was NWA San Francisco territory, and that was under the NWA banner there.
Yeah, you know, I think the earliest form of the NWA titles that was actually sanctioned by the NWA was like early the 1960s. And you're right, and there was many regional United States titles. And like you said, we all know the one that from the Crockett, because I think the NWA stopped recognizing United States title in the early 60s, and then it became a territorial thing, just like most of the other titles, because I think the NWA from its board only recognized the world title, the women's title, and the junior heavyweight title, which they actually control the booking of. Everything else was there was no world tag team title. Everything else was territorial.
Yeah.
But like you said, that Detroit, that was the Detroit version that we saw, because I saw the different side plates that Dick Brower had on, like I said, and it was and it's not lineage or doesn't have any lineage to the ones that we all know for the Crockett Mid-Atlantic title that the WWE still uses today, where they date their United States titles back to, I think the year was 1973.
What's up?
I could jump in here a minute.
What's that?
Go ahead, George.
I could jump in here a minute because Reggie brings up a good point about these titles. And, you know, the NWA, as Reggie pointed out, they officially only recognized the heavyweight champion singles wrestler and the junior heavyweight champion singles wrestler. That was the only two titles the NWA officially had. What the deal was with all the territories that were under the NWA banner is that they would recognize their own NWA World Tag Team Champions.
Correct.
And at different times, there were 3-4 different teams around the country that could say they were recognized as NWA World Tag Team Champions, but the NWA itself never officially recognized anyone as their NWA World Tag Team Champions. So I think that's really a good clarification, because they only recognize the singles titles, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I've mentioned this before. I think it's important to point out that the NWA wasn't really a promotion. It was a title.
Yeah.
There really was no, like the AWA, we had an organization that ran cards all around the country and one champion and one tag team champion. Same with the WWF and the those after that. But the NWA was just the National Wrestling Alliance with a group of promoters that each year would get together and vote. Usually they wanted to keep the title on their champion, for their heavyweight champion, for about 2 to 3 years. That was the general goal. It worked sometimes. Other times they had to make some adjustments. Like one that comes to mind is the Dick Hutton, when he was the NWA champion. He only had it for a couple of years, and they said, we got to get it off the guy. He's not drawing. And it was not Dick's fault. He just didn't have any charisma. He was a hell of a wrestler, and he had all the credentials. And he was endorsed by Lou Thez, of all people, to take Lou's title. But he couldn't draw people. And that was the reason they went at 2 years and put it on O'Connor. That's what. So just so that clarification is there, when somebody says this team held the NWA tag team title, well, there were 13 teams at one time that could lay claim to it around the country.
That's correct. He's totally correct.
Go ahead, Wes.
Oh, Reggie, what's the belt that's over your left shoulder there? There's a red one there, a red leather one with
that's a replica of the first United States title, it's commonly referred to as the red leather United States title that we say Harley Race held, but actually there's no pictures of Harley with that particular belt. Harley or Terry Funk. I'm trying to think. Some of the early pictures, if you look it up, it's like maybe Blackjack Mulligan,
Johnny Valentine, I think.
That's correct. And it might have been the first person who actually held the title. Actually, the title itself, not the actual. I'm talking about the belt itself. Correct. Pictures of the belt, but and you see what people get confused is like Sergeant Slaughter has a replica of a red leather United States title, and what people don't realize, the first version and second version was a black. Red leather was the first version. The second version was a black leather. And if you see, the plates are totally different. They look the same, but the size and dimensions are totally different. And, I love Sarge, but he's going around. He had the belt re-leathered, the second version, and saying it's the original belt. But you can clearly, it's hard trying to tell Sarge that, hey, Sarge, you had the second version. That's not the original, the original plates. He has the original plates, but he had it re-leathered.
Right. Benny, chime in.
Yeah, I was going to ask Reggie, because I think Nikita and I was talking about this last night on our show, that Bruno Sammartino one time was he'd wrestled at the Garden, and I guess he wanted to get something to eat after the match. Drives to a restaurant somewhere in Manhattan, leaves his belt in his car. Somebody walks by, sees it, and lifts it. What would something like that be worth now if it showed up and it was authenticated?
Oh man, it's almost like everybody heard the story about Tom Burke finding the Pedro Morales heavyweight belt at I call it a pawn shop, but he said it was I don't know another name for a pawn shop, but those belts now, if they're authentic, can go anywhere from $10,000 up to whatever the collector is willing to pay. George, you remember a few months ago I showed you some collector in Japan that had the AWA title. Somebody said he paid Nick Bockwinkel over six figures for that belt.
Wow.
And the thing is, I wouldn't totally doubt that, because I know at the end of his it was way after his wrestling career was over, but Nick was looking for money.
Oh, really?
Let's just put it that way. and he was selling stuff off, so it wouldn't surprise me. I want to mention that Bruno Sammartino incident that you brought up, Benny. I seem to remember, and I'm not saying this is factual. Just be something for all of us to think about as historians. I seem to remember that belt did show up, the Bruno belt that was stolen from the car after that story broke, and it was a while after.
Wasn't it dumped in a mailbox or something?
No, that's the AWA story for Vern's belt. But the Bruno belt, now you got me curious because I'm going to be going through stuff here. I think that belt was found, but it was destroyed. I mean, it was a mess. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, that's great. We'll get it corrected. Sure. And then Wes, the one you mentioned, that was Vern Gagne's, the original Police Gazette belt.
Okay.
That he had been using as AWA World Champion. It was on a ringside table in Davenport, Iowa in July of 74. On the ringside table during a match, some goofball ran up, grabbed the belt, and right out of the building. I mean, you tell me how weird that is.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't planned, I mean, this kid or guy, whoever it was, he had to have been anticipating this. But anyway, the belt was then, after it was reported stolen, etc., and it was later found in a garbage can with the jewels that were in it taken out. And I always laughed at that story because the guy that took it showed he was even a bigger moron by not keeping the belt and keeping it intact, you know.
Yeah.
And 50 years later, look what I have. I mean, not that would have made it any more right. It would have still been wrong, but what a moron, you know. But the belt was destroyed. Vern got it back, and he did have it fixed, but it was nothing near what the original AWA belt was. And that was the reason that when Nick Bockwinkel won Vern's title in November of 75, he didn't have a title belt for the first couple months. There was no belt. And he'd come to the ring, recognized as champion, introduced, etc., but no belt. And then that's when the famous, as they call it, the
inmate. The inmate.
The inmate belt. I was thinking prison, Reggie. Yeah, the inmate belt. Vern had the belt made by a prison in Denver. Yeah. I believe it was Denver. Yeah. And that was the beautiful belt that Nick wore for the remainder. And then, of course, we know the debacle on that one when Stan Hansen took it and ran over it with his pickup truck. So, you know, title belts are fun, man.
Yeah. Mike, you're how far do you go, Mike, with the NWA US title?
Well, as far as the titles, I mean, I'm not as rehearsed as far as the history of. I do know quite a bit about it being the American Wrestling Alliance. Obviously, that was Vern Gagne's promotion. I know he was the founder and he was the main booker. As far as that, they've had some great wrestlers come through there. Bockwinkel, Stan Hansen, Hulk Hogan was originally from there, I believe. A few. I mean, a lot of talent. My question is actually for George, and my question is what led to the downfall and why did they cease their operations at that time? Because they were a pretty good, solid show, and they were very old school. And I understand that, and this was at the time when WWF wasn't even a top name. I mean, I know that they were Capital Wrestling Corporation, started off as the WWF, then converted the name over to WWF once Vincent K. McMahon had the actual promotion before he gave it to, well, I didn't say give it, but he actually sold it to his son, Vince McMahon. So what actually led to the downfall? Was it money? Was it just poor finances? Not enough TV time? I mean...
Well, you know, this is a story that's had more lives than a cat. And we could do a 2-hour podcast on this alone, Mike, but long story short, if you go back to let's just take the 60s, the 70s, and the first half of the 80s, well, the first 3 or 4 years of the 80s, generally speaking, and I say this in sincerity, and any wrestler, God bless them if they were still here, they'd tell you this. They wanted to work for one of the big three promotions that at that time was the WWF, the NWA affiliates, and certainly the one they most wanted to work for was Vern Gagne's AWA.
Yep.
And if you look at the history of the guys that came through from 1960 to 1985, I mean, it literally reads like a who's who of the greatest wrestlers in the business that came through the territory at one time or another. The problem at the time was that, like any company, they could only have so many wrestlers on the roster at any given time. So let's just say you had 15 or 20. Well, you got to keep rotating them. And that's the reason, the guys would come in for a year to 2 years, and then they'd move on to another territory. They might come back later on for a spell, and we always had our mainstays that were here, that all the storylines and angles were built around. Vern, of course, Crusher, Larry Hennig, Mad Dog Vachon, Nick Bockwinkel. Those were the mainstays. Bobby Heenan played in there.
Question for you.
Answer your question.
Okay, go ahead.
It wasn't money. Vern was sailing the high seas with great cards. He created Hulkamania. Anybody out there that wants to come out and say that Vince McMahon started Hulkamania, they're lying through their teeth, because Vern created what the Hulk was before he went to Vince.
Yeah.
And when to be honest with you, when Hulk was first in the WWF, Vince Sr. didn't know what the hell to do with the guy.
Right, exactly.
And literally, he was going nowhere, and he came to Vern. He got some training. He got some interview work. Bobby Heenan, Greg Gagne, and believe it or not, Nick Bockwinkel, they worked with Hulk Hogan to get that character out of him. I mean, before that, Hulk came on an interview, and he couldn't put a sentence together. And he had Johnny Valiant as his manager when he first came here because of that. Johnny Valiant, you know what he could do. If you remember Johnny, I mean, that guy was genius on the mic.
What a mouthpiece.
So he was the mouthpiece for the heel Hogan, but the fans cheered Hogan. He was big, blonde, 6 foot, 100 feet tall,
Yeah.
And they cheered him. So Vern got rid of Johnny Valiant, turned him to a baby face, and got him in, let me tell you something, brother. And he went on the routine. Right. So the long story short, though, is when Junior Vince came out and decided he was going to take over the world, when it happened, you guys, none of us believed it was going to happen. We didn't think he had a snowball's chance in the proverbial hell. But the deal was that he had a vision, and he was 33 or 34 years old. He was going to do it, and he was willing to go completely broke in doing it. He talked Hogan into coming with him, took Hogan from Vern, and, all the stories about Hulk Hogan leaving and Vern not keeping him and Vern not putting the title on him, you got to sit down and you got to put it all together, because there's so many little pieces to that puzzle. But the bottom line was, Vern had intended to put the title on Hogan in April of 80. Got to get my year straight here. April of 84-ish, 85, or 84.
84.
But it couldn't come together. And Hogan was in Japan in December of 83. He got contacted by Junior Vince. Come and work for me. Tell Vern to go to hell. I'll pay you to not show up. That's what he did. And that started the war that changed wrestling forever, because in the wrestling business, Wes knows this. I know Reggie does. And Benny, I know you do. Chris, you probably do too. They didn't have contracts in the wrestling business. You came to work for me as a promoter. We had a handshake. This is what I'm going to do with you. This is the matches we're going to put you in. This is what we're going to build around you. And when it's time to go, you'll go your way. I'll go mine. That's the way the business ran. Hogan changed it, Vince changed it. And when he started putting all these contracts together, well, of course, he leaves Vern, and he picked on Vern more than any other of the promotions because Vern had Hogan. Then he took Gene Okerlund, and Hogan went. And when he went, he said, I want David Schultz to go with me.
Right.
David Schultz was his number one enemy here in the AWA, Hogan's. It was his number one opponent. But they were friends, and he wanted Schultz. Next thing you know, Bobby Heenan is gone, Jim Brunzell is gone, and Vince is just telling all these guys to come. And before you know it, it got to the point with the AWA where anytime Vern brought a guy in, he'd build a card around him and the guy would disappear. Well, you know, in any business, it changes after that.
So let me ask you, were no shows prevalent at that time? Where guys would just know? It
Not
wasn't.
up to that point. No.
No. Okay.
No. Over the 2.5 decades that, you know, from 1960 to 84ish, the 2.5 decades that Vern ran a solid company. If he had a no-show, it wasn't because the guy didn't show up because he left the territory or anything like that. It was because the guy either was legitimately sick or they worked some angle around it and he was going to no-show for that reason, to build a story. I mean, you know, the guy was injured or whatever it was.
Okay, so basically some of the no-shows may have happened because of injury. I mean, honestly, back then they were a little bit more...
Well, the one guy that I don't think ever had a serious injury, but anytime he was missing, he was injured, and that was the Crusher. The Crusher would be gone for 2 or 3 months. But when he was gone, he was injured. And they always had a storyline. The Vachons, Mad Dog injured him, put him out of action. Fans, we don't know when he'll be back. But what it was with Crusher, he liked to take vacations. Vern, I'm taking time off. That was it. And Vern never argued with him in the sense because Crusher, anytime he'd come back, Vern could pop a house. Crusher was so over, whether he was originally a heel and he was over or when he popped as a babyface. He was gold at the box office. So Vern had no problem with it. And the other thing was, and this is going off that track a little bit, but Vern always went to the Crusher for short-term situations. Do this for me, Crusher, because. And the one example I'll give you that was really a dire need, when Hercules Cortez, who was one half of the AWA tag champs at the time, was killed in a car accident, Vern had to replace a main event guy on that team with Red Bastien, who was Cortez's partner. And it made sense to put the Crusher in there. He went to Crusher. Crusher hadn't been around for a few months. He went to him and he told him, he said, I need a favor. I need you to step in. And Reggie, not this Reggie Lasowski, Crusher, his first words out of his mouth were, how long is this going to be for? Because he didn't want the titles. He didn't want to be strapped with them. No pun intended. So he agreed to do it for Vern as a favor and held the title until they could get it off of him and Red and put it on Nick and Ray Stevens. But Vern ran a territory where he demanded something unique. He wanted you to wrestle first and have a gimmick second. We want to put on a clinic each time we can. We want to have solid matches. If we have to give the guy a clown suit to get him over, we'll do that, but let's have him wrestle first. And that's the way Vern advertised his business. So we didn't have a lot of, I mean, we had.
Did that have to do with his amateur background? Because you have to understand, he wrestled in college, so he was an amateur first.
Vern, when he
Kurt Angle was
trained,
an amateur too. I mean, those guys are the ones that know the true wrestling and the actual, you know.
Mike, when you look at the talent roster that Vern churned out of his training camps, and you look around all the territories in the late 60s, the 70s, and into the 80s, every territory had a Vern Gagne or several Vern Gagne wrestlers on it, whether it be Blackjack Mulligan or Ken Patera or the Anderson brothers or Larry Hennig. you know, the list is so long. I said Ken Patera, but Vern churned out wrestlers that all made money in the business. And they did because Vern trained them first to wrestle. And Vern used to do something unique. Take him out to his old barn here in Minnesota, cold barn. He didn't have any heat in the thing with a light bulb hanging from the ceiling over some grungy old ring. And he'd have the guys beat the crap out of each other. And I swear to God, he never told them it was a work. He wanted them to learn how to work, learn how to hurt, learn how to feel pain. And he did this because he said, this is what's going to make them a real deal. They're going to like this business or they're going to leave. And Ole Anderson, when he left Vern's camp, he was Alan Rogowski out of Minnesota here, Rock Rogowski. He debuted. He was here for a year as Rock Rogowski. Mm-hmm. The very first night that Al Rogowski was going to make his AWA debut, that was the night that Vern told him who's going to win the match that night.
Wow.
And Rogowski, he's told that story. He said, Vern told me the night of the match that so-and-so was going over. What do you mean he's going over? Well, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to work a match. Vern didn't tell the guys it wasn't real.
Hit him without. That's what I mean. They kind of been letting it flow. Hit off the bat.
So,
and we've heard that story so many times that the guys were training, quote, beating each other up, and they were probably ring ready, but they were just getting closer and closer and closer. And then, guess what? Tonight, there you go, right?
Well, and Jim Raschke, Baron von Raschke, would tell you that too. He went through Vern's camp in 1966, and when he came out, he was Jim Raschke from Nebraska, as he calls it. But he was as boring as watching the paint dry on a bedroom wall. He was so dull as Jim Raschke, and he had a good amateur background. And for the first few months, when he came out on an interview, and Vern always tried to put his Olympians and his amateur wrestlers, he tried to give them that push and that, you know, they had these accolades to their credit. But Jim Raschke was so boring. And when he tried to talk, oh my God, you want to have a sleeping pill, just listen to his interview and you're out. Well, when he went with Mad Dog up to Canada in 1967, and the dog turned him into this German heel, Baron von Raschke, and showed him how to do an interview, and he got, you know, his fake German accent. But the Baron was a different character. And I still laugh today because when I see Baron, and the last time I saw him now was a couple of months back at Al Darusha's memorial service, it amazes me how Jim Raschke is such a soft talker, and you sometimes can't even understand him. He talks so low, and you know he's just so low key. But at an instant, he can turn on the Baron, and that's all the people need to know. You know?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not trying. I can never imitate him. The guy's a classic. But I mean, I do that to emphasize that he knew how to put it in and take it off.
Hey, George, could you tell the story how they were talking about the AWA and its height? Tell me the story about, wasn't Nick Bockwinkel offered they was going to put the NWA strap, but he made just as good money in the areas. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
In 1996, I was doing a taped interview on my deck here at my house with Nick Bockwinkel. We were doing the interview. Do you guys know Scott Teal, who does Goldwire Press?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
At the time, Scott was doing a semi-regular publication called Whatever Happened To, with a question mark, and he'd have a wrestler in that blank. Well, I was doing an interview with Nick for Scott. And Nick sat out here. We had even a beer. And Nick told me the story that when he came to the AWA for starters, when Nick came here in 1971, Vern wanted to put the title on him. He told Nick that I'm going to be eventually slowing down. I'm going to need somebody to transition to, and you're going to be the guy. They were friends. So it took him 5 years to do it because Vern didn't put it on him until 75. And part of that Hercules Cortez story I mentioned is one of the reasons why it took that much longer. But anyway, Nick told me, he said he was offered from Fritz von Erich when Fritz was president of the NWA at that time period to take over the NWA title if they would put it on him. So Nick said, I take a pad of paper. Now you got to remember, this is in the 70s now. Nick says, I take out a pad of paper and I got the pros and I got the cons. And he said, I list in there all the travel that Harley Race is doing. And Harley was wrestling, and Nick chuckled when he said this, but it is true. He said, Harley's wrestling 369 days a year. And there's only 365 days in a year, but he's doing matinees, one in the afternoon.
Double shots.
And double, traveling all. He said, Harley is never home. And the NWA champion, guys, remember I said the NWA was just a champion. So he's in Los Angeles tonight. He's in Australia tomorrow. And then he's up in Winnipeg or Toronto. Then he's down in Hawaii. Then he's in, it was crazy. And Nick says Harley was making $250,000 a year. Now, I don't know if that's the actual figure. That's what Nick threw out in 1996 that Harley was making in the 70s. And Nick said, and that's what I was making with Vern. And I was wrestling 6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
And when he says, that doesn't mean he just wrestled 6 months, but he would wrestle the whole year, but he'd have 2 or 3 days off a week, in a given week. And you could take, a week off here and there. And he said it was a schedule where I could be home with my wife. And Harley never even knew what his wife looked like, and he never met his kids. He was teasing, of course, but that's what it was. And that was the reason that Nick said, forget it. I don't need that when I got the same amount of money that Harley's getting, and Harley's putting in a lot more work.
George, as a person who likes to look at stats and look at all the results and things like that, because that's my bag.
It's mine. It's mine.
Yeah, it's yours too. And I've put something. I'm going to be posting it probably tomorrow. A little bit of I think it was March and April of '75, and there was the AWA schedule, and in maybe what could have been 8 weeks, there was probably 15 matches, 20 matches at the most, and but then, like as you said, you look at the NWA champion who's going every night and traveling all over the place. It's one of the things that the AWA stood for, was that the insiders knew that I'm going to get paid good. I'm going to have time off, heal injuries and what have you, stuff like that, right?
One of the things that most wrestlers would have told you during that era, and like I say, again, I wish so many of them were still here, but they wanted to come to the AWA because, number one, it was a lighter schedule than most other territories offered them. You take a guy that would go down to work the Florida circuit, and it was a booming territory, and it was a great territory to work in. But you literally were working 7 nights a week. Mm-hmm. You'd be in Tampa one night, Miami, then Palm Beach, and then Miami Beach, and then Fort Lauderdale, and then Tallahassee, and then let's start the whole thing over. And they would, because they ran weekly shows.
Yeah.
If you were down in Texas, whatever part of the Texas circuits, Texas had like 5 promotions within the state. You had the Von Erichs with Dallas and Fort Worth and some spot show areas. You had the Houston area with Paul Bosch. You had Corpus Christi and San Antonio, and you had the Lubbock area with the Funks, or Amarillo with the Funks, and Lubbock was Nick Roberts' promotion. But anywhere you wanted to go up and down that state, you'd never have a night off. And, the guys that worked in the Mid-South for Oklahoma, Louisiana, and all around that circuit, oh, my God. And it would be 600-700 miles from this card to that card, and they would drive. And they would tell you that the schedules that we had to keep, if we got to the AWA, we could work 3-4 nights a week, and we'd be home and get to, be with our kids before they graduate from high school. And that's really what it was. And Vern during those years, I never heard a single wrestler say that Vern was not a good pay guy. And as the AWA crunched up and started to fold in the mid 80s and so on, there are stories how Vern didn't pay that he was supposed to pay this guy and he didn't pay that guy. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted out there. But Vern was definitely one of the most respected. Another great territory was Pacific Northwest. You went up and worked for Don Owen. You could work every night of the week if you wanted to, and you made good money. Another good payout guy, according to most of the wrestlers. But the AWA was the place. In the 60s and the 70s, they all wanted to come here for at least a time.
Well, I'm gonna sponge off of you, George, and Benny, if you will, please roll clip number 2 is Playboy Buddy Rose.
Yeah, speaking of Portland, yeah, here we go.
235, Las Vegas, Nevada, Playboy Buddy Rose. Referee Rodriguez, timekeeper Okuda.
Here he comes from Las Vegas, Nevada. Look at that beautiful robe. Has Playboy Buddy on the back. This is Buddy Rose. Well, he weighs in at 238 pounds. Playboy Buddy Rose, Las Vegas, Nevada. And what a colorful robe. Just gorgeous.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next event will be one fall. Introducing in this corner, 248 pounds from Las Vegas, Playboy Buddy Rose. His opponent in this corner, 242 pounds from Houston, Texas, King Parsons.
I gotta go back and see that match. Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Playboy Buddy Rose towards the end of Buddy Rose's career on the independent scene. But as you said, Benny, that was Hawaii, NWA Hawaii, San Francisco, and Portland. And of course, we knew he showed up, right? Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens, Wes, and he was into WWF as well. So some classic action with Playboy Buddy Rose.
Buddy Rose, when we speak of Vern Gagne's trainees, Buddy Rose came out of the 1974 camp of Vern Gagne that Vern put on. And he was, of course, Paul Pershman out of Minnesota here. He was a buddy of mine. Didn't know him really well in those years, but we were friends at the matches. And he was enamored with the heels. Paul Pershman was just an average size guy. He wanted to become a wrestler. Vern, I want to tell you right now, Vern didn't want to train him at first. Vern didn't think he had it. And then Paul, he was persistent. And that's what impressed Vern at that point. Vern wanted you to show that you wanted to do it. And Paul Pershman kept showing up, and Billy Robinson was one of the trainers with Vern, and Billy punished Paul Pershman badly, let me tell you, because Billy, that was his job. Vern said, we're gonna make him or we're gonna break him.
Yeah.
And that's what we wanted. Well, Paul became a pro wrestler. He worked for Vern for, probably half a year or so after that, maybe a year and a half, maybe a year. Right in that, I'd have to look. But one thing is big claim to fame, which most people will find a little bit of trivia here. The night that Vern lost his AWA title to Nick Bockwinkel in the St. Paul Auditorium on November 8th of 1975, For some reason, Bobby Heenan wasn't there that night, Nick's manager, but Bobby Duncombe was his second. And of course, Bobby was also managed by Heenan at that point. And Greg Gagne came out as Vern's second. The special referee assigned by Stanley Blackburn of the AWA was Paul Pershman. And Paul was the one that raised Nick's hand at the end of the night. And the rest is history. He went to Texas right after that. And if my memory serves me correctly, usually it does, except when I'm trying to remember if I ate lunch or not. I think it was Terry Funk that gave Buddy Rose the name Buddy Rose.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain I've got that in my records that Terry Funk was the one that dubbed him Playboy Buddy Rose.
Wow. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I like the heels. I was a heel fan, and it's nice to see a guy that what you perceive as a fan as a chubby, out of shape kind of guy flipping and flopping and doing what they should be doing. Buddy Rose was great at that. I always enjoyed him. Seeing him back in the day when I was tape trading, or when he did eventually come into the WWF as a much heavier guy. One of the times he was in Toronto, they used to hire some good-looking women to accompany him when he was in the WWF. And one night he showed up at the Gardens, and I was like, oh, my God. I looked up, and I was like, there was a very famous peeler who worked the Toronto area, and I don't know why I know that. I don't know that, but she was one of the ladies accompanying him, and she was gorgeous. But it was like Adonis. When Adonis started putting more weight on, he could still move and he could still do all the things that he basically had to do. And it was always nice to see, like I said, as a fan, standing back, thinking, "Oh, look at that big fat guy!" But they could do it all, and it was great to see it. And Rose wasn't partial to not bleeding, which was good for a heel. And he paid his dues, George. Definitely paid his dues, right?
Well, and the thing about Buddy Rose, too, the weight thing, he struggled with weight. I mean, if you see very early pictures of him, I got his earliest publicity shot. And I mean, if he was 200 pounds, I'd be surprised. But Buddy struggled with weight. He had diabetes really bad. And the weight kept coming on, and he was struggling with his diabetes. And then eventually, I'm sure it was just too much for him. He started using it as the gimmick. The weight was the gimmick. Yeah. They'd introduce him at 271 pounds, and he'd get on the announcer that I'm
217. Yeah.
As he would be eating a chocolate candy bar.
Okay.
He started using it as the gimmick. But on that note, you guys are probably familiar with Ed Moondog Moretti, who wrestled in San Francisco. And Ed's been a longtime buddy of ours. And he worked around Paul Pershman a lot in San Francisco and everything. And here, I forget exactly how long ago it is now, but I remember the night at 10 o'clock, I got a call from Ed Moretti. And he told me that Buddy had passed away that afternoon. He fell asleep in his chair and his recliner and died. And it was sad news.
Yeah.
So he was a good talent. He was on the first WrestleMania as a was it the Executioner? They called
wrestled Tito Santana as the Executioner.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those little trivia things that you can at least add that to us. But Buddy was funny. He'd be talking to you, and he'd be eating a block of cheese the size of a car battery while he's doing it. I mean, he was a character, a good guy. He paid his dues. He got to live a dream. He was a fan like me and so many others. Back in 71, 72, 73. We hung out at the matches together when we'd come there, and I never wanted to be a wrestler. I didn't want any part of it. but buddy, he wanted to be. So
Cool.
Oh,
God bless him.
yes. Well, Mike, the class, why don't you highlight our independent wrestler of the week?
Absolutely. So this week's independent wrestler of the week is Kyle Pro. He's from Minnesota Independent Wrestling, which is owned by Terry Fox. They wrestle out of Shanhausen, Minnesota, which is about 16 miles southwest of Minneapolis, St. Paul. They put on a great show, and he is autistic, and he goes by the name of the Missing Piece. And Kyle Pro, the man that steals the show. I love this kid. This kid's great. He's a 5-time champ, and just an all-around great wrestler, great up-and-comer. As far as he just won the belt, and they just concluded their season. MIW. They had their last show, so he had won his heavyweight championship the show prior to that. So this week, our indie wrestler of the week is Kyle Pro out of Shanhausen, Minnesota.
Let me just correct you on the pronunciation of the city, Mike. It's Chanhassen.
Chanhassen?
Wow. Chanhassen, Minnesota. I'm in Minnesota.
Okay, I went on Wikipedia and it said, and it pronounced it Chanhassen. Is that?
No, it's Chanhassen. Trust me.
It is Chanhassen.
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
Wikipedia, I'm going to call them.
Well, you listen, Wikipedia, don't even waste your time. You know, that should be taken off of the internet. It's Chanhassen.
Chanhassen, Minnesota. Okay.
And I know Terry Fox. I've not long ago I'd been to some of his cards, and he puts on some good indies.
Oh, I like the characters they have, and they put on a great show. Yeah.
But it is Chanhassen. So
Chanhassen,
as soon as you said
Minnesota.
that, I said, "Oh my God, I got to correct him because."
Yeah.
I knew you were going to do
Well, and you're going to like our military salute of the week, George, because it's a famous Minnesotan. Mike and Benny, give our salute.
Okay, this week's salute to service is Laverne Vern Gagne. Served in the Marine Corps from 1943 to 1946. Not only was he a Marine Corps in the Marine Corps, he was drafted into the Marine Corps. He also served in the Navy, so he was a dual service, and he was pretty distinguished, obviously. But the great thing about Vern that I read was that he gave back to the community, and I was very impressed by his story. He was a promoter, a wrestler. I mean, he did everything. I mean, to me, if I had a Mount Rushmore of classic wrestlers, Vern would be one of the top. He'd be one of the top 4.
Well, we'll let George say something, and we're gonna plug WFIA Vice President, Mr. Brian Ferguson, on his great book that he just did. His first book is Vern, and he's you can get it on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And go ahead, George.
Well, I couldn't say anything much better than what Mike did. You know, here in Minnesota, which was Vern Gagne's home, and back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, Vern was a household name in Minnesota. You could, even a fan who never watched wrestling knew who Vern Gagne was. And, you know, it was like Harmon Killebrew with the Minnesota Twins baseball team. And he just was a class guy. He really did. He was always giving to the amateur wrestling funds. He was working with the amateur wrestlers. He would show up for fundraisers. Vern was very, very charismatic. He was, it's no wonder that he was as good as he was because, and then the book, I'm glad you gave it a plug. Brian Ferguson did just a tremendous job on it. And I hope it sells a zillion copies for him. It's a good book. So,
yes. And Benny, before we wrap it up here, if you would please pull up our picture, our public service announcement of the week for our third show is Tunnel to Towers Foundation. You can go to T2T.org. And also, you've seen the commercials all the time on TV with Mark Wahlberg also promoting Tunnel to Towers. It's just a great foundation. and they help all the first responders, not just from 9/11, but all our first responders. And that is our public service announcement of the week, Tunnel to Towers Foundation. And Benny, before we wrap it up here, we got to say thank you to our great panel of guests here this week. And we appreciate you guys.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Mike, I just met you. I enjoy that. Thank you. My old buddy, Reggie. I love you, man. We got to talk again soon.
Yeah, it's been a while. I miss you, George.
And then Wes. Wes is the man.
Okay, I got just one question from Reggie before we leave. How did you come up with the name of 605? Did somebody come up with that for you, or?
Yeah. You know, most people names are self-proclaimed, but if you go back and look at a lot of pictures I used to post, I would listen to another podcast and I bought a T-shirt and it just had 605 on it. In a lot of belt groups, when I post, they see the T-shirt and they start calling me Mr. 605, and I was like, I think I like it. So
I like it too. That's a great one.
I ran with it and started putting on my T-shirts, and hey, the rest is history.
Hey, Chris. Okay, I look around here and I see this one and only Play Scala and the Class and Wildman and 605. You and me, buddy. Where's my authority name?
You guys need gimmicks. Yeah.
The authority. That's what all the wrestlers called me.
Exactly.
That's what Benny said. We need a gimmick name too, I guess. I don't know, but I think I developed a rapport in this great classic pro wrestling industry as myself, right? So
awesome. The son of Nick DiCarlo.
I wish.
There you go.
Wasn't it Yvonne DiCarlo?
Yeah. Well, that would even be better.
Yeah. Well, guys, we appreciate you. We thank you for coming on. And, of course, we'll have you back down the road. And, Benny, why don't you take us out for this week? Next week, special guest, Mr. Pat Tanaka. We can't wait for that one.
That's one of my AWA guys.
Yes, indeed. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you.
All right.